For both of these positions, you do have to have a bachelor's degree. For our park ranger position, any bachelor's degree will meet the minimum requirement. For our district wildlife managers, that degree does have to be in biology or a closely related field. And I can't name every single degree that might meet that requirement, but things like environmental science, fisheries management, wildlife management, environmental science, maybe I said that one already. Anything that has a strong background in biological sciences is probably going to qualify. These are law enforcement positions, so for both of these positions, folks are required to pass a background check. Folks that have already applied have probably already received an invitation to start working on that. And then there is a physical fitness test for both of these things. Again, law enforcement position, you have to be a minimum level of physical fitness in order to be able to perform the work. And it's not on this page, but after you're offered a position, a conditional job offer, we do have some further steps. Colorado, in order to send you to a post academy and get you to be post certified as an officer in the state, you do have to have a medical exam and pass a psychological evaluation. So those are some other steps we'll talk about here in a little bit. So here's the hiring process on one slide, and it is not a simple process, and we acknowledge that, but these are very important positions, and candidly, we have to we have to go through some pretty rigorous steps to hire these folks. So the very first thing that happens is that when you submit your application, it goes to DNR HR, and then Sarah and her team are going to be evaluating those to make sure that you do in fact meet the minimum requirements for these positions. Once that determination is made, you'll be invited to participate in our background check. So this year we're using an online service to try to expedite that. And then there is a written test that you'll take, which is 100 questions. It's multiple choice. We're going to talk more about that test here in a little bit. And that's going to be done online this year as well. So people are able to participate and do that virtually. You don't have to come to our office to do that test. And then the folks that kind of the top tier folks from the written test will advance to oral panels. So oral panels, you're going to have about an hour long, again, a virtual meeting where you're going to be talking with folks who are at various points in their careers with CPW, parks officers, wildlife managers, park managers. And there's a number of questions and scenarios that you'll be asked to respond to. And again, those are scored, and we're looking for the folks that perform the best in that series of oral panels. And the people who perform well in oral panels will then move on to polygraphs and physical fitness tests. And then after that step, the very next week will be final interviews and conditional job offers. And I'm skipping through things kind of quickly because I'm going to take you to the next slide that shows sort of a timeline that kind of hopefully will make this a little bit more clear. And after conditional job offers, these are the last steps that people have to check off in order to make the conditional job offers final job offers. And it's the medical exam, the drug test, and then a psychological evaluation. I'm going to go to the next slide here, which is kind of a timeline. So applications, we started accepting applications on September 1st. Applications close on September 30th, and they have to be submitted, I believe this is right, Sarah, by 4 p.m., and that's Mountain Standard Time. So if you are applying from somewhere else in the country, and that is not your time zone, please be aware that that is the time zone that matters for this job announcement. So at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, we will not be able to accept any more applications. You will be notified, I think, that same day, right, Sarah, or shortly thereafter you're moving. I don't know if you're trying to answer.
Yeah, same day. So if any applications that are received that day, they'll get a response back. And yeah, most of the folks that meet the minimum qualifications, or if there's any type of issue, with meeting the minimum qualifications, you'll generally receive a notice about 3 to 4 business days after you submit your application.
The people who have their applications in, and there's no question about their status as far as minimum qualifications, on September 30th, we are going to send out the links for the written exam. And there's also a writing prompt we want folks to respond to. And those are due on October 6th by 5 p.m. And again, that's Mountain Standard Time. And so those are the cutoff times for when we're going to accept responses on that. And all the background check materials are due as well on October 6th. So if any of you have looked at or investigated working for other agencies in a law enforcement position, maybe you'll recognize that this is a very aggressive timeline. So last year, and all these folks that are trainees this year can attest to this, our hiring process took about 7 months from the time that the announcement went live until when these folks got an offer for employment. And that's pretty typical in law enforcement, and some agencies are much longer than that. If you look at this, from the time announcements close until we're going to make conditional job offers is about a month and a half. And so I'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but this is an aggressive timeline, and it's aggressive because it's meant to be hopefully something that's a little more easy for you to participate in, so you're not having to wait around for half of a year to find out whether or not you're going to get a position. But in order for us to make this aggressive timeline work, we do have some pretty strict deadlines, and things have to be turned in on time and in a complete fashion too. So as soon as we receive applications and we find out that they do meet minimum qualifications, we are sending out the link for folks to complete the background check materials, because we recognize that that takes a little bit of time for some people to fill out and to collect documents and references and things like that that they will need for their background check. So we get that out as quickly as we can. The links to the exams will go out all at the same time so that everyone has an equal amount of time to complete those exams. So they're going to be due on October 6th. We are going to be notifying people very shortly thereafter what their status is based on how they did on those exams, and if they'll be moving on to our oral panels. Oral panels are going to take place the week of October 24th. And again, they're going to be done virtually, so they'll be done in an online fashion. You just have to have a computer or a phone or some way of joining a remote meeting. And so people can see and hear you and interact with you and talk to you. And when the links for those go out, and Sarah's the expert on this, but you're actually going to be able to pick your time slot. So you're going to sign up for an appointment. And although there are oral panels going on that entire week, you are only going to have to participate in one oral panel. If you are applying for both positions, and if you're interested in both positions and you qualify for both positions, strongly encourage you to apply for both positions. So if you're applying for both positions, there is a written exam for each position. If you perform well enough on both of those written exams, you'll still only have to do one oral panel. There are some questions that are specific for our district wildlife manager candidates, some questions that are specific to our park ranger candidates, some that are shared by both. But again, you only have to have one appointment that you'll have to keep, and it's about an hour long for that oral panel. So we will have scores for oral panels again within a couple of hours of them being concluded. We'll notify people again how they did on those oral panels and whether they're moving on to the next step in our hiring process. And so the next step in the hiring process is the in-person piece. And again, we have appointment slots for polygraph exams, physical fitness tests, and final interviews. And folks that score well enough are going to get the opportunity to sign up for an appointment for both of those things all at the same time, essentially. So if you wanted to do your oral panel on the 4th, or excuse me, your polygraph and physical fitness test on the 4th, and then you can turn around and do your final interview on the And then we're going to be making conditional job offers on the 11th, the day after, maybe even the evening after we finish all of our in-person interviews. So polygraphs are an important step in a law enforcement hiring process. Unfortunately, they do have to be done in person. So those are going to be held in Denver, and there are appointments essentially starting at 7:15 in the morning and going until about 5 o'clock in the evening. Each appointment, again, is not that long, but that's when those appointments are offered. And then whichever day you sign up for your polygraph, that same evening will be the evening that you're going to do your physical fitness test. So polygraph and physical fitness will happen on the same day. We are doing physical fitness tests after polygraph examinations so that there's no chance of you exerting yourself having any negative or otherwise influence on the results of your polygraph. So conditional job offers will be made as soon as final interviews are over. And then first day of unemployment with CPW will be on December 28th. So that we have 2 days where you're going to come for kind of some new employee orientation stuff, get fitted for uniforms, things like that. And then you'll have a few days off. And we'll talk about what happens in the training year in just a second. But that's essentially what the hiring process looks like. Again, after conditional job offers are made, so in between November 11th and December 28th is when you'll be having to do your medical exam. Your medical exam and drug test will happen at the same time, and then your psychological evaluation. Psychological evaluations are done online. You don't have to come in person for those either. So that's the timeline. And then move on to the next piece here. I just want to highlight this and talk about it briefly because this is where we lose a lot of people. Not the first piece, the second piece here. So the first piece is if you're not a resident of Colorado and you're moving to Colorado or relocating to Colorado, we're going to ask that you try to get your driver's license prior to you starting employment with us and have a Colorado driver's license prior to work. But this next bullet point here about honesty and integrity, we're looking to hire law enforcement positions. You know, these are positions of public trust, and integrity is absolutely paramount in these positions. You will go through a polygraph examination. You know, we're going to have parts of our hiring process that are done online this year. You're going to be able to fill out your written response, and you're going to be able to do your multiple choice test online. There's not going to be anybody sitting with you in the room to make sure that you're a person of integrity and you're not trying to cheat or whatever, but you are going to be asked about it during your polygraph examination. And if folks, you know, are cheating in our hiring process, they're not going to be hired in a law enforcement position. And, you know, in a similar fashion, you know, all people are imperfect and no one is perfect, and we understand that. And so if you have had issues in your past where whether it's drug use or some other kind of illegal activity that you've been involved in, you're going to be asked about that during your background check process. You're going to be asked about it during the polygraph examination. And having those things in your history is not an automatic disqualification for you to come and work in these positions. But if you're not honest about those things and you try to cover them up and lie about them, and we find out about them after the fact, or your polygraph says that you're being deceptive in your answers, you know, that is probably going to remove you from consideration. And I can't stress this enough. You know, we want you to come and work for us, but we do need you to be open up front during this hiring process. And it's probably the number one way that we lose people during the process. So briefly, I'm going to cover the training year, and then should be close to the end of our prepared presentation, and we'll start answering questions that people have. So we are hiring people to train. So we're going to pay you for an entire year to train. The first 5 months of your working with us is going to be attending the POST Academy. So POST stands for Peace Officer Standards and Training. All of our park rangers and district wildlife managers are level 1 peace officers. So they're empowered and expected to enforce every state law everywhere in the state. Park rangers, their primary responsibility is obviously parks law enforcement. Our district wildlife managers, their primary responsibility is wildlife law enforcement, but they are fully certified level 1 peace officers. So they go to an entire police academy, just like every other police officer in this state. Right now, our academy that Parks and Wildlife uses is Arapahoe Community College in Littleton, Colorado. So that is where you'll be doing virtually all of your training for the first 5 months. After the post academy, we do all of our field training and agency specific training. So these are the things like boat operator training, ATV training, horse training, and then field training where you're working with experienced officers, making contacts and learning how to do the job while working with an experienced officer. And that takes place basically from June all the way through December. And it takes place largely in Denver, but we do have a lot of this training requires travel around the state. If you're required to travel around the state for training, the state pays for your travel expenses. So we put you up in a hotel or in a cabin or state housing someplace, and then pay for per diem and meals and all this kind of stuff. What else on that piece? Most of our folks are way out in one of our bunkhouses on the Kansas state line right now, so that's where they're zooming in from. And then towards the end of your first assignment, you're going to be assigned to a vacant park ranger position or a district wildlife manager position. Those can be anywhere in the state. We don't always know where those vacancies will be when we hire folks. And I know I saw this question that came up. Do we try to take into account people's personal situations and family situations when we're placing people? Yes, 100% we absolutely do. If we have 15 trainees and there's 15 vacant districts and nobody wants to go to the district on the western slope or the eastern plains, we still need to send somebody there. So there's not a guarantee that you're going to get your first choice, but we do everything that we possibly can to work with people on that. And then we look for people to work in that first assignment for 2 years prior to looking for lateral opportunities or promotions or things like that. And if you're required to relocate, the state does pay for relocation. And I don't know if I fully explained this for the first piece, but when you come work for us, you do, if you're not already in the Denver metro area, you have to relocate to the Denver metro area prior to starting. And the state does not pay for that first relocation to Denver. If you live a little bit outside of Denver, and some of the people on the call tonight do, and you're not interested in trying to move for a year or whatever, you're welcome to commute, and a couple folks are choosing to do that. But when you get assigned to a district, if it's outside of the Denver metro area, the state will pay for your moving expenses. And let's see. I think this is, in fact, the last slide till we get to just panel questions. And I'm looking to Krista and Travis, a couple of you, to help us pick the first ones to go to. So I want to make sure folks do understand that we are folks that work in the outdoors and doing natural resource law enforcement, doing natural resource management. And a lot of times that we're doing our law enforcement work is when other people are out there recreating. So a lot of times that means working nights, that means working weekends, that means working holidays. Does it mean you have to work every single night, every single weekend, every single holiday? No. But you're probably going to work more weekends than you're going to have weekends off in these first district wildlife manager and park ranger positions, because that's when the public is out there and that's when we're needing to do most of our work. And this is a law enforcement position. For the district wildlife manager position, it's probably it's going to vary a little bit from district to district, and it's going to vary from time of year, from spring to summer to fall to winter. But on average, law enforcement is about a third of what a district wildlife manager does. And then the education and management pieces and customer service pieces make up the other 2/3. That number is probably a little higher for our park rangers, closer to 50%. And again, it's going to depend on which park you're assigned to. Some parks are very busy and there's a lot of use and a lot of law enforcement that happens on those parks. And some parks are not as busy and have a lot more resource things going on. So it's not possible to say, this is exactly the number. And again, for our rangers, it's going to be pretty seasonal too. Most of the law enforcement work is going to be happening during the peak season for those parks, spring, summer, fall. And a lot of the other work is going to happen other times of the year. So that's the kind of big picture stuff. And we'll let these guys talk about it because they've been working in the field with our experienced officers for a while now. And then the last piece I have on here is just schedule wise. So I try to be as accommodating as I can. Some of these guys, people giggle about that during the training year, but during the training year, we have a lot to cover. And the logistics of it are pretty involved. So, you will know at the beginning of your training year when there are some scheduled times where you just have off. But otherwise, that whole year is pretty well spoken for. When you start, you're going to be working 40 hours a week at the academy from January through May. And at the conclusion of that, you're going to be out in the field training with other officers or doing something virtually the whole year. So the training year is pretty heavily scheduled. A lot of pretty regimented, I guess is what I'd say. So with that, that's my big picture overview. Tried to make it brief so we can save most of our time for questions. And Krista and Travis, if you want to pick one off, and then whoever would like to jump in there and try and answer it, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, Frank, we've been answering questions as we go as well for the ones that have very direct, clear answers. And then if you've highlighted it in your talk, we've mentioned that in some of the answers. So for those folks tuning in, if you go and look at the Q&A section, you can see some responses as well for some of those. A couple of questions that have shown up multiple times here, Frank. I'll throw them both out and let you answer them, and then we'll pull out a few more. First one being, what's the best way to prepare for the written test? And the second one being, can you, and this maybe is a Sarah question as well, talk about some other experience, if you can substitute it in lieu of a degree. That question came up several times in a few different iterations.
Well, I'll start on the written test, and then I'll look to Aaron and Connor, and Sammy and Jacob to add some thoughts. So globally, the written test, and if you look in the job announcement, it kind of gives you broad categories of things to study for. I saw somewhere else someone said something like, should you study? I think absolutely you should, because there's some state personnel rules that are involved in all of this, but at the end of the day, we're only allowed to interview so many people. So we have to narrow down the list of applicants to the number that we're allowed to do a final interview for. And that's very much like a regular job interview that you would do. So the written test is the first piece of that, and we're only going to take the top tier off the written test. So yes, I would encourage you to study. For the DWM exam, it's a lot of questions about Colorado wildlife and their life history, Colorado ecosystems, habitats, and environments. There are some questions in there about Colorado wildlife law, not a ton, but there are some in there. And then there's some kind of general questions about kind of issues that Parks and Wildlife deals with and kind of things that we're concerned about here in Colorado. So that's a high level look at what's on the wildlife exam. Parks exam is very similar. A lot of kind of, I'll say, general recreation questions about our state parks and our state parks history, and some park management principles. So there are some questions about, how you might deal with issues that arise on parks and how you would manage things like revenue and some things like that. And then I'll be quiet for a little bit and turn it over to the people who most recently took the exams and see what tips they have for you.
The only thing I would really say is for the park side of things, really think about if you're in a management position at a park, for some kind of those situational based questions, really think about the order in which you would prioritize things. And I think that'll help you go a long way. So And that'll help you go a long way just in general in being a park ranger. A lot of what we do is prioritizing the needs of the park, the needs of the resource, and the needs of the people on the park. So that's something I would just keep in the back of my mind for each one of those questions. And really, really take your time. I know there is a time limit. I think it's a little bit different this year. We all took it in person. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, I think it's online this year for the test.
Yeah, it's a similar questions, but it is going to be online as opposed to having to come to take it.
Okay. And then, yeah, just remembering integrity when you're taking that test online. If you're out there in the field in a park and you have to, sell something in the entrance booth right away, you might not have a calculator. You might, need to answer a question right away that you can't look up. So just remember to treat this test as if you're out in the field and you are actually working the job that you're applying for.
I was going to add on to that, Connor. So Connor's absolutely right. When you're taking the test, it's good to take that test from the perspective that you are going to be managing a park one day, and they want to know what your answers would be with regards to, are you able to do basic arithmetic? Are you able to do basic reading comprehension as well? Are you able to speak? Are you able to answer questions about Colorado parks and wildlife in general? So with regards to studying, make sure you spend some time on the CPW website, go through that. I remember with my test, when I took it, there were some actual wildlife questions and Colorado like ecosystem type questions, which I was wholly unprepared for. So it might be a good idea to look at that as well. Of course, Sammy and Jacob would talk more about the DWM side, but just be aware that if you're applying for a park ranger position, you will have to have some knowledge of the biology within the state and ecosystems within the state. And for the tests as well, you should be able to answer there will be some questions on that.
Yeah, off of that, the website is where I spend the majority of my time studying. There really is a wealth of knowledge on there. It's a little clunky to use, especially for those of us that are used to these super nice streamlined websites. But when you get on there, there's a Learn tab, there's an About Us tab, and there's a lot of really nice tabs. And as you kind of start to dig in there, you really can get a lot of information, and a lot of that is the stuff I ended up seeing on the DWM test. So understanding a lot of kind of what natural resources are, and also like what natural resources we have in Colorado, specifically understanding a lot of the information on our website helped out a lot. Sammy?
Yeah, that's exactly what I did too. I went to our website. I basically went back to my biology books in college, brushed up on that. So if that's something you didn't study the college books yet, keep those, go over those. Really good information carry finally for the test. But
Yeah, and I think lastly, understanding a lot of our policies and then a lot of like the programs we have in the state will be super helpful throughout your whole hiring process. It's not just about biology, it's about the agency, and every kind of intricate program that we do, and understanding everything, and every kind of little piece that plays into the job of district wildlife manager and the job of park manager, because it's not just, like Frank said, law enforcement or anything like that. There's a lot of there's a lot of nuances and a lot of little things that are super helpful on our website to learn about before you get into that oral board, or start taking that test.
Sorry, I was looking for my unmute button. And then Sarah, I think, I don't know if you want to speak to a little bit. The second part of that question was, what does it look like to substitute experience for the education requirement?
Sure, and we've actually spelled out quite a bit of that very specific appropriate work experience that they consider substitution for education. So that's in the substitution section of the announcement. It's different. The substitution experience for park rangers is different than the substitution experience for wildlife managers. So just kind of, keep that in mind as you're looking through that and considering whether or not your experience qualifies. And then it's pretty spelled out. Plus, if you have individual questions, I know I work with Frank quite a bit on, hey, how do we feel about this experience and whether or not that translates into these roles. So we do kind of help with that in terms of that assessment. But there's no guaranteed parallels oftentimes. So, but we do look at a lot of them on a case by case basis. Is that, Frank, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I mean, I would just say, so it is pretty detailed as how it's spelled out in the job announcement. But I would say broadly, we're looking for parks management or park ranger experience for the ranger position, and then wildlife management experience for the district wildlife ranger position. So that's an oversimplification, and there's more detail in the announcements, but essentially that's what we're looking for generally. Travis or Chris, you want to pitch us another one?
Yeah, another one that's come up, and I think you've started explaining it, and maybe even explained it, but it'll be worth explaining again. Just the first assignment process. That we've had some questions about what positions are open, and so maybe talk about how positions change within the agency and how we assign when we assign them, and just because the position's open now doesn't mean it will be in a year whenever this group will be up for assignment.
Right. So globally, so first we're looking to hire up to 20 park ranger trainees and 20 district wildlife manager trainees. So this is one of the larger classes that we've had in a while. We've had a lot of retirements and people getting promoted and things like that, and a lot of vacancies coming up. So we're hiring folks this time of the year. So we're going to make job offers mid-November, and then you'll be starting in December. And we're trying to anticipate how many folks we're going to need at the end of the training year. So it's not really possible for me to say exactly where these positions are going to be. They could be anywhere in the state. Generally speaking, we do have more state parks and more state parks positions kind of along the Front Range and the Denver metro area and things like that. But we do have parks positions on the Eastern Plains and the Western Slope. And then district wildlife manager positions are scattered all over the state. And so the process is essentially, you go through training, and our park rangers are actually getting very close to their assignment day. That happens for them at the end of October. For the district wildlife managers, it's typically the end of November, the beginning of December, depending on how the holidays fall. So what will happen is, once we're getting closer to assignment day and we know which vacancies we're looking to fill, those trainees, the park ranger trainees or the district wildlife manager trainees, will sit down with either the area wildlife managers or the park managers that have vacancies. And each trainee will be asked to kind of list what are their preferences, where do they want to go, top 2 or 3 parks or district, and then where are the places they're not really wanting to go, bottom 2 or 3, and then kind of why. And so trying to find out from them, is it because they've always really wanted to work on the Western Slope, or is it because their spouse has a really great career and they need to stay close to a hospital, or whatever it is. So we try to get all that information from them, and then we always do the best that we can to place people where they're going to be successful. So that's sort of what that process looks like. So they'll find out kind of, again, toward the end of the training year where they're headed to. And then, they'll have about a month after the training year before they're expected to be on their new park or their district. So just because they're done with training, at the end of December doesn't mean they need to be at their new park on January 1st, ready to work their first shift. They still have some time to relocate also. So that's process-wise. I think I covered that, Travis. I don't know if there was another piece to that.
No, I think you did. Yeah, there's just some folks asking about applying for specific positions, and that's not how this process works. So I think you summed that up. Just a simple couple questions that did show up a few times. Age limits has been asked. Are there lower end age limits and upper end age limits for these positions? And so I'll let either Frank or Sarah answer that.
We don't have an upper age limit for sure. I mean, you have to pass the physical fitness test and a medical exam. So a medical doctor has to certify you as capable of doing the job. I'm trying to remember the post requirement, if it's 18 or 21. Jacob thinks it's 21.
I think it's 21 as well.
Yeah, so in order to be certified as a police officer in the state of Colorado, you have to be 20 years old. So if you had your degree or enough experience already, you'd have to wait until we were legally allowed to post-certify, which would be 20.
A good question that came up is just talk about growth opportunities, what the normal progression throughout our agency is from kind of after this first placement, where do officers go and how does that look?
Why don't you take a stab at that first, Travis? Because you've got some knowledge there, and I think people might be tired of hearing me talk.
Yeah, for sure. So throughout the state on both wildlife managers and park rangers, there are different levels of wildlife manager and park ranger. And so on the wildlife side, our state is broken up into areas where there's an area manager. Underneath the area manager are anywhere from 6 to 15 or so district wildlife managers, which is the position you might be interested in, that you might be applying for right now. So that's first level is district wildlife manager. Next step above them is an area manager. We have 18 different areas across the state of Colorado. And then above area managers are regional managers. And so that's kind of the stair step up the ladder on the wildlife side. On the park side, you start as a park manager 1 and then progress up to park manager 2. We have senior rangers and then we have park managers who are usually the ones making final decisions for any of our 43 state parks. And those park managers their rank falls anywhere from 4, 5 to 6, depending on the size of their park and visitation and a bunch of different factors. And so there are steps up, and if you talk to anybody who's been in their agency very long, they probably have moved up the ladder at some point. We are an agency that promotes mostly from within. We don't do a lot of outside promotions or looking for a ton of mid-career laterals or things like that. And so it is a good agency for growth potential. And the other panelists on here, besides myself and Frank, are pretty new. If they have anything they want to add about what they've seen or observed, I'll give them a chance to do that.
Yeah, and I guess real quick, I'll touch on one thing is with respect to the hiring process, and that is that when you get hired, you're either a wildlife manager 1 or park manager 1 as a trainee, and at the conclusion of your training year, you move automatically. Then, assuming we are successful in getting you commissioned and getting you through field training, you'd move to a wildlife manager 2 or a park manager 2, and that is a promotional step, and there's a pay bump that's associated with that. And then I'd also just offer that there are other, those are, so Travis talked mostly about the kind of direct line promotional opportunities, but there are a lot of, I'll call them side tracks that you can take into education or interpretation or trails management or biological work, grant management. There's a lot of other things that our agency is involved in. And a lot of folks who do that work now started where Connor and Aaron and Sammy and Jacob are right now. Okay, let's look at another question real quick then.
Anything, Krista?
Yeah, one I've seen pop up a few times is kind of what the process would look like for folks that already have their post certification if they were to get hired.
So that doesn't happen a lot because Parks and Wildlife does pay for your post certification. We're paying the tuition and paying your salary to attend the post academy. So most of our folks come without a post commission, but we do occasionally have people who come to us and they already have a post commission. And typically the way that works is if they already have a post commission, they would still start employment with us on the 28th, just like the rest of their class. And then during the post academy, so that January through May time period, while the folks that don't have a post commission are earning their post commission, people who already have it will usually get some kind of a special assignment, working for a park or an area or for the training unit, doing some special project that we have, and there's no shortage of work that we have around the agency. And then typically they rejoin their class at the conclusion of the post academy for our field training program and all of our agency specific training. And again, a lot of the people who come to us with those post commissions already, they're not typically coming from other agencies that do very similar work to ours, a typical police department or sheriff's office or whatever. They have a significantly different job, and so there's a lot to learn about how our job. And even if you were a park ranger in a different state, and looking at Connor there, the way that we do things here is different than the way they think, in a different state. And so there's a lot of state specific information that I think is important for you to get. And particularly kind of the multi-purpose role that we do here is not super common in other states. And I don't know, Connor worked for another agency, I don't work post-commission, but same kind of idea. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Sure. So, yeah, coming from different agencies, like, Sammy worked for Larimer County for years, and I came from Washington State Parks and then a municipal ranger program. But I can say that the extensive level of training I've received from CPW is just a completely different experience for that. So if you are, post-certified or coming from a different agency or anything like that, those 6 or so months that we spend after the post academy is done is really what makes you a better park ranger, a better DWM, and really gives you value with this agency. The other thing I'd say is that we do different jobs, DWMs and park rangers, but what's really great about the training program this year, and I think moving forward, is that we don't split after the academy. So I'm out here in Burlington with the DWMs, learning all about hunting and stuff like that, because it does happen in state parks. And I think that, that camaraderie that you develop is a career-long camaraderie. And, if I have questions about hunting, I've got, a bunch of people, a bunch of resources who I spent so much time with, training. So I think that, it's great if you're coming to us and you have those skills, and all those skills that you've got from different agencies and everything. They're great tools in your toolbox, but you can't replace the time after the academy. I will say, even in the academy, we went to a police academy. So a lot of our instructors were local sheriffs, local police departments, all kinds of stuff. So, we learned from them as well. I don't know if you guys have anything to add. No?
Yeah, so I think some of the things we learned in the police academy are directly applicable to our jobs, and some are not as applicable, but you can still find ways to use them. So I think that transitioning from that period, if you already have a post commission, you already kind of know a general idea of kind of how to do that job, but the things that you learn throughout the next, for us it was 7 or 8 months, are kind of invaluable as far as how to do our job.
I'll just add one more thing too. We have our own standards as far as, defensive tactics, our own policies as far as use of force and things like that. So I know one of the challenges for me coming from another agency was not reverting back to things I've done for years, but learning the new way. But I think it's been a great challenge, and, again, more tools in the toolbox. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you do a certain style of, arrest, you might have to change that to meet our agency policies once you meet up with.
Just building on what Connor said, the post academy for me was primarily, it gave us a good baseline. I know for Connor and I, we're park rangers, so we need to know Title 33, which is our Parks and Wildlife Code. But as rangers as well, we do a lot of Title 42, which is traffic, and Title 18, which is criminal code. And that's stuff that was the baseline stuff we learned in academy. And it's absolutely essential that we have that to do our job. But the most important thing I took away from academy was that camaraderie experience, being able to build that teamwork and those relationships with my fellow park rangers and DWMs. And it's if you already have a post certification, if you have an opportunity to go through and get that post again. I know in my last ride along in Cherry Creek, I rode along with a ranger who came here from Texas, and he had a post cert, and he went through it when he got his CPW job as a ranger. He went through post again, just because it was an invaluable refresher, but it was an opportunity to get to know the people who are going to be in your class and work with them and see what they're like and see how well you guys can work together and just overcome obstacles.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll say about that is if you are coming from a different state, so post-certification is something that happens outside of Parks and Wildlife, right? So there's a board, Peace Officer Standards and Training. They do have a program by which people can challenge. I think it's called a provisional post commission. So if you're coming from a different state and you're post-certified in that state, you can go through this process to get a provisional post-certification, and then you have to challenge kind of the written test and the shooting and driving and risk control and all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole process involved there, and if that's you, I mean, we're probably going to be talking about that one-on-one. If that's a process you want to try and go down the road of, rather than, like Aaron was saying, go through and do the Colorado Post Academy. So, before we move on to our next question, there's something I meant to start earlier, and I'm going to try to do it now just because I forgot to do it earlier. So I'm going to just launch a quick poll, and I'm hoping that you guys are able to see it. And mostly this is just so that we're trying to do better every year and learn about, the best way to get word out about these kind of job openings and webinars and things like that. So if you wouldn't mind doing me a quick favor and filling out that poll, it just helps us to kind of know what's going on and improve next time around. So while that's cooking, is there another question, Travis or Krista, that you can pitch to one of us?
One I've seen a few times is more about like the salary and how that changes kind of year to year and what those tiers look like.
So I'll let Sarah chime in here with more detail. And I'm not going to remember the exact number. But if you go on to the state of Colorado's Department of Personnel Administrations, you can look up all of these job classes within state government. And so, park rangers are in the park manager job series, district wildlife managers are in the wildlife manager job series. This position is a park manager 1 or a wildlife manager 1. We start all these folks at 10% above the baseline for those series, which is where we're allowed to start you. So this year, that's roughly $47,000 for this next year's class. And then at the end of that year, you would move from a wildlife manager 1 to a wildlife manager 2, or a park manager 1 to a park manager 2, and that's a different range. So you'd stay at 10% above where you were for the 1, and you go to the 2, and it's mid to low 50s right now today, I think is the number, but that's something that could change and does change. So here's the fun part working for state government, right, is that a lot of this stuff is controlled by the legislature. And so, the governor proposes a budget, and then both chambers in our state house talk about the budget and then eventually pass a budget. And the governor is going to sign that budget into law. And then July 1 through June 30th is what's called a state fiscal year. So last year, for example, last legislative session, I should say, the state legislature approved a 3% raise, and those went into effect on July 1st. What else, Sarah, do you want to talk about as far as pay policy and some of that stuff?
Yeah, that pretty much covers it. All of the automatic progression is approximately 10% increase up in the pay scale, and then other opportunities like promotions to other positions outside the series, are also possible and tie back into those positions also.
This might be a Sarah question, or this might be, we need to send more information, but we've had a few questions about the pension and Pera. Can we just do a high level overview of Pera and what that looks like for new hires?
Oh, sure. So in lieu of paying into Social Security, then all employees actually have monies withheld in lieu of Social Security to go to Pera. So that's that retirement fund that the state uses. And then let's see, I don't have a whole lot of information about that. We do Also have, so we have two different plans for that. We have a defined benefit plan. We also have a defined contribution plan. We do have information about those programs on our state website. So you can get some really in-depth information by going to the Department of Personnel Administration's websites to view all of the information about those plans. We do also offer pre-tax and Roth 401k plans and 457 plans with that as well.
And I will say, you know, that's, I don't know if it's the first day or the second day, I can't remember, is when they have new employee orientation. They talk about retirement plans and healthcare benefits and things like that. Go over those in a little more detail. And Connor and Sammy and Jacob and Eric can probably tell you there's so much information kind of thrown at you during the first year. It's kind of like drinking out of a fire hose. So, you know, whether you retain all of that information or not, there's other ways of getting it again. We have periodic opportunities for people to go to lunch and learns and webinars and things like that with Pera and other things. But yeah, there is a retirement plan within CPW, state government generally.
Just sorting through some of the other questions. A lot of them are very specific, only applies to the person asking them. Krista, do you have any others that you saw? One kind of, this could apply to anybody, Frank. Is there a time limit on the essay portion of the test? They saw that there was a time limit on the multiple.
There's not, other than that it has to be in on, I think it's October 6th at 5 p.m. So they'll get that link as soon as the announcement closes. And that one, tell them too, like you can work on it on whatever platform you want, you know, Word, Google Docs, or put it on a piece of loose leaf paper, whatever you would like to do. Submit it through a Google form. And you can, on that one, you can do any research you want to support whatever your response is. You just can't have someone else help you write it, essentially.
And then somebody did ask about grooming standards as far as hair, beard, piercings, tattoos. Is there anything you'd like to highlight on that, Frank?
I don't remember the thing in its entirety, so I'll try to hit the high points, and maybe some of our newest officers will remember it more fully than I do. Obviously, you can see several of us, you're allowed to have facial hair. I know there are a lot of law enforcement agencies that don't allow that. CPW doesn't have that policy. With respect to tattoos, you can have tattoos, you just can't have any visible tattoos that are going to be offensive. So I'll leave it at that. Won't try to come up with examples of what offensive tattoos could be, but you can't have any offensive tattoos. And I know there's probably some standards. I think for piercings, you're not allowed right now to have any face piercings, you know, like eye or nose or things like that. So just ear. And then I don't know if any of Sammy or Jacob or Connor or Aaron, if you guys can remember any further detail on those things than I can.
I know that the academy has kind of its own standards, but in the academy, I know like beards, you're allowed to have beards, but the academy is pretty strict as far as like uniform and hygiene, and they're going to do inspections and stuff like that. But I can't remember any specific things as far as our policy. I think it was, I can't remember. There's a whole policy that, you know, when you get hired, you can read, but I think there are certain standards on like beard length, hair length, things like that. Just remember you're working in a public job, and you know you are the face of the agency when you're out there. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, we won't cover it on this webinar, but you'll learn all about officer presence and command presence and the importance of that, and you know, you showing up on scene looking like you know what you're doing and are capable is your first way to de-escalate a situation. So
We did have a question that got, and sorry, it got buried. It came up a minute ago, but some people were curious about what our male-female ratio is, and then what overall diversity ratios look like as an agency. I know we won't have hard numbers for this conversation, but does anybody want to weigh in on that?
I'll talk generally, and then I'm gonna talk long enough for Sarah to talk maybe more specifically, because she probably can. I think, like a lot of law enforcement agencies, like a lot of natural resource agencies, we're not doing as well as we could or probably should. I think, generally speaking, on the parks side of our agency, park rangers, there are more a higher proportion of women in those positions than on the wildlife side of our agency. I think we have fewer women in those positions for our wildlife positions. Not that that's something that we're proud of or wanting to encourage, but I think it's a pretty low number on the wildlife side. Certainly less than 50% on the park side as well. And I don't know, Sarah, if you have any more detailed information, or maybe you do, Travis.
Yeah, I don't. That's actually the pretty, accurate kind of picture. We're working on some of those initiatives as part of our equity, diversity, and inclusivity programs and things along those lines. But I don't have exact data for this meeting, unfortunately.
Specific to the background check, Frank, we've got a few questions about people or from people about references and how many references you're looking for. And then if they don't have some contact information specifically about people that they maybe have previously dated or been in relationships with, if they've fallen out of touch, what's the best way to deal with A, number of references, B, people you don't contact with, and then bonus question, do references help in the application process, not part of the background with the actual application?
So let me talk about the background piece of this, and then Sarah can speak more to the application piece. I'll try to as well, and she can let me know if I said something wrong. So we are using this year for the first time a platform called Guardian, and Guardian is a background check platform that hundreds of agencies across the country are using. If you've applied for another agency and you log in, it has all of your information from previous applications, so we'll make it a lot easier for you to apply with other agencies or for us in the future if you don't end up getting a job offer this year. It does ask for 6 references, and those are, it prefers that those references are not people you've listed as supervisors or family members or whatever. If you can't think of 6 people to put down and you need to reuse a supervisor or somebody like that, then you absolutely can. It will ask you about previous roommates, previous supervisors, things like that. And if you don't have contact information for those people and you can't get contact information for those people, it's not going to necessarily exclude you from being considered. But part of what's going to happen during the background check process, and this is something that you can share with references and landlords and things like that as well, is that we're going to send them a reference check form and we're going to ask them some questions about you. And it includes, previous spouses or previous domestic partners or girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever. And we're trying to make sure that we're not offering a law enforcement position to somebody who we shouldn't be. So to the extent that you can, you need to try and put as much of that information in there as you can get a hold of. Even if that means making a couple of phone calls, which is why we're trying to give you as much time as possible to do it. But at the end of the day, if you can't get a hold of them, you can't get a hold of them. If you can't provide us, any information for any references or any previous supervisors or any landlords or any roommates or anything, now I'm going to be a little more concerned about our ability to confirm that you're going to be a good candidate for us. And then with respect to the references with the application process, so maybe this is something I'll let Sarah talk about a little bit, but resumes, cover letters, reference letters or whatever, those are not really looked at in our application process until basically final interviews. And Sarah, let me know if I'm wrong here. But the most important thing with respect to looking to see if minimum qualifications are met is going to be the stuff that you put in your application and your answers to those supplemental questions. And then after minimum qualification review, we, as an agency, because we have a lot of people who apply for these positions, are relying on written tests, oral panels, and then references, cover letters, things like that are coming back into it until final interviews. Is that accurate, Sarah, or did I?
Yes, that's super accurate. That's exactly right. So please don't, if you haven't filled out an application yet, please don't put C resume or C cover letter, because unfortunately we're not using that as part of that minimum qualification review. Also, any folks that aren't submitting their college transcripts, if they're using education to meet the minimum qualifications, unfortunately, those applications are getting kicked back out. And we're requesting that you resubmit an application with those transcripts. It's totally fine if it's an unofficial transcript or an official transcript. We do want to try to avoid having some locks that sometimes come with those official transcripts from the universities. So it's totally fine if you want to use those unofficial transcripts to apply. The other piece too is that so the substitutions that are very specifically listed in each of the announcements for the education degree requirements, it's pretty detailed as to what appropriate work experience a substitution means. And so in your application, you're actually able to kind of confirm how many years of experience that you have that's very specific to that substitution language of work experience. We also do give you an opportunity to explain in the supplemental section also how your prior work experience actually does fall into this kind of model for what we're looking for substitution. So just kind of be really mindful of those supplemental questions, answer the content of the application, as thoroughly as possible. And obviously you have to keep in mind that we're not going to look at those cover letters and letters of recommendation, resumes, and other documents until late interview stages.
So give Travis and Kristen a minute to find us another question to answer. And I'm just looking at the time. We're going to go until about 8. And I'm going to let the rest of these guys get on with their evening. I may stick on a little bit after that to answer questions. I know there are some questions that we have a lot of questions we haven't gotten to yet. And I don't know that we will get to every single one of them in the last 20 minutes. And some of them are very specific to individual people. So the other thing I'll offer now, and you'll get, well, you've already gotten an email from me, I think, as a reminder that this webinar was happening. My contact information, and I think maybe Sarah's, are available as part of this application process. You can reach out to either of us directly. And, my name is not super complicated. So it's frank.mcgee@state.co.us. An email is probably going to be the best way to get a hold of me if you have questions that we don't get to this evening. So with that, what have you got for me?
A couple times this popped up. Roughly how many applicants do you expect out of this? And I know averages are all over the place, but if you want to throw out your best guess on how many you're expecting, Frank, now's your time.
And maybe I can look to Sarah and she could tell us roughly how many we've already received. That would be a starting point. And I'm hedging here because we're doing a lot of things different this year. So normally, to apply for a state government job in Colorado, you have to already be a resident of Colorado to even submit an application. If you look at either of the job announcements, one of the very first things listed on the announcement that you'll read is that we applied for and received a waiver for that requirement this year. So this is the first year that we've received that requirement, and we'll be accepting applications from outside of Colorado. And then we've also significantly shortened our hiring timeline and changed the time of year when we do this. So I don't know. But I would say probably more likely that we'll see hundreds of applications than thousands. So that would be my super rough ballpark answer. And Sarah.
Yeah, we're about halfway through our posting period, which is pretty exciting. And so far for park rangers, we're looking at around 200 received so far. And then district wildlife manager trainees, we're around 150. And then, just keep in mind, some of those totals can fluctuate a little bit depending on how many folks, are submitting without their transcripts, and we're kicking those back and asking them to resubmit. So it seems like we're going to have probably at least 200 per position that get to move forward to that testing phase.
The complicating factor that we see with that some years, Sarah, and I don't know if this is part of that yet, but inevitably every year we have some people who are applying for both positions, right? And meet the requirements for both positions, and test well for both positions, and in some cases make it all the way to a final interview and are still being considered for both positions. So I'd say that also.
I'll make a quick plug here just because I've seen it come up a couple of times in questions about other job opportunities. This webinar is specifically about park rangers and wildlife district wildlife managers, which is our law enforcement positions within CPW. But CPW does have a ton of other positions in a bunch of different career fields. And so if what you're hearing today makes you think maybe this isn't the right fit for you, but you are still interested in working for CPW, you should definitely check out the CPW, the same webpage you went to find the job announcement for Park Ranger and DWM. You can go and you can see other opportunities around the state, anything from administrative work to biological to research to maintenance. We have all sorts of positions. We have about 1,000 employees across the state. So we also have a ton of volunteer positions if you just want to learn more about us and get some volunteering in. And another good way, and it hasn't been brought up yet, is the idea or is the opportunity to do some ride-alongs as well. If you don't know anything about our agency, if you don't know anybody who works for our agency and you want to get to know, reach out to your local office and see if you can set up a ride-along of some sort. It can happen at a park. It can happen through a area where you ride along with a DWM. That's a great way to see up close what it looks like to do the day-to-day of the job, and it will definitely give you some insight that will help you in this hiring process. So that's the route you're going.
Yeah, and I would say, if you're sitting on this webinar and you're thinking about applying and you want to learn more about the agency, when you make that phone call, let them know that, hey, look, I'm applying this year. So can I get a ride along quickly, soon? Can I talk to somebody? And if they can, they absolutely will contact you.
Here's a question that came up a couple times. Similar question is about couples or married couples that are both applying and how we deal with those. I'd say it's not a commonality in our agency, but Frank, do you have any good insight on for these folks that might be applying with a spouse?
No. So it's not super common. But I would also say that another thing that I've seen happen, that Travis has seen happen, a lot of people have seen happen. Even if you don't apply together, we see that people who spend an entire year hanging out and doing training together sometimes inevitably end up getting involved. And I guess what I would say is it sort of depends. We don't have any policy against those folks getting placed in the same area. The only policy that we have is that you can't supervise somebody that you are in a relationship with, whether that's a family member, romantic relationship, or whatever. A lot of times, most of the couples I'm familiar with recently, we have one person who's a park ranger and one person who's a district wildlife manager, and they end up getting extinction close to each other. A lot of times they'll get assigned to, neighboring areas. But again, when we post these announcements, we don't necessarily know which positions are going to be filled. So can we guarantee that both people will go to the same place? No, can't. Can we try to get you close to each other? Maybe, right? Within reason. But then, you'd have to look at trying to lateral after that first assignment, if there wasn't one that would put you, right next to each other, kind of a thing. Can't make a position if there isn't one there. And I don't know, Travis or Sarah, you guys have other thoughts on that?
You gonna highlight the details of the boot camp again, Frank? Or
yeah, so we didn't talk about that, so that's probably a good thing I didn't highlight or talk about it at all. So you do have to pass a physical fitness test, and you know, they're not super duper hard standards, you know, push-ups, sit-ups, sprint, and a long distance run. But please don't show up the day of your physical fitness test having never tried to do them, because you know they are challenging. They're totally doable, but they are challenging. So we're looking. We've contracted with a couple of personal trainers here in the Denver metro area, and they're actually going to run a virtual physical fitness boot camp for us during the month of October. And I'm looking to Krista to give me the details here, but they're going to have 2 available workout sessions with the trainer a week. So twice a week, we'll have these physical fitness sessions leading up to the physical fitness test. But please, 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 if you are going to apply for these positions, practice that test before you show up for the actual physical fitness test. Because if you don't pass it, we cannot offer you a job. Krista, any more details on the boot camp?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so, and if you've already applied, you probably received some information on this as well, and it has a link to just like a Google form to fill out, so that I can collect like email addresses and things like that to send out the link for Zoom, and just kind of keep folks updated on the dates as those come. But as Frank said, it'll be 2 days a week throughout the month of October, just done remotely over Zoom.
And it's not mandatory, right?
Nope.
So if you're a super CrossFit guru person who's super physically fit and you're very confident in your ability to pass that, you don't have to go to it. But we're providing it as a service to try to help people be successful, because that's really what we want. We're trying to find people who want to do this kind of work and work in this field. You know, this is a job that you know, the video says maybe it's not for everybody. Well, not everybody wants to work out in the mountains or, you know, on a boat all day or whatever, but it's a very rewarding career and work that most people in this agency are very, very passionate about. So if you're passionate about this kind of work and you're excited about natural resource management, we want you to be successful in this application process.
Here's a good question for some of the other panelists. Do wildlife officers and park rangers have enough time to go out and hunt and fish themselves? Connor, Jacob, Sammy, what do you guys think?
So as far as that question goes, wildlife managers, hunting seasons really are busy season. So those rifle seasons, those 4 rifle seasons, and that 1 archery season, a muzzle loader, you're really going to be doing a lot of work during those seasons. So it's my understanding, granted we're not on the job yet, but those are going to be pretty filled seasons to not really be able to book a whole bunch of other time to go out on your own personal hunts. There are other seasons that are open. There's late season tags and things like that, in which I've heard other wildlife managers talk about, and looking at those as viable options to still go out and hunt and fish, and you know, be able to fill your freezer, because we got into wildlife management for a reason, and a lot of us are hunter and fishermen. So there are other options, even though, you know, your traditional 4th season or 3rd season hunting camp is probably not going to be as viable for you year in and year out. Sammy? Sweet.
Connor, you want to add anything, and then I'll jump in.
I'll just jump in there too. On the ranger side, though, our slow season starts when hunting season starts, so you can always keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you know, I mean, management-wise, a lot of folks recognize within this agency that we are all very passionate about recreating outdoors and trying to create opportunities to do that. And I think Jacob put it well. Could you take off 2nd season in its entirety every single year? Probably not. That's our busiest, you know, big game season. Could you take it off occasionally? Yeah, probably. Could you take part of it off occasionally? Absolutely. But are you gonna take the entire thing off every single year? No, no way. And I will say that, you know, this and these guys, this first year of training, there's not a lot of time. Their year is pretty well booked all year long. But that's just this first year of training. That's not your entire career. That's just trying to get you prepared to work in a district or on a park. So that's not going to be the case every year. But first year, you know, there's not a ton of downtime first year.
Had a question about high cost of living areas, Frank, and what our agency does for officers living in high cost of living areas.
Sarah, can you answer that one? I mean, I know we have something. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, we do actually offer, the Department of Natural Resources actually does an evaluation each year where they calculate high cost areas based on, you know, different demographics. And so any areas that DNR identifies as high cost, then there's typically a housing premium that's provided to employees on their paycheck. It usually ranges between $100 to $400 per month. And that's reevaluated each year for any kind of changes and adjustments and things along those lines.
Got a few more here. This is a simple one, but I think we need to make it crystal clear. Frank, question is if we've used marijuana in the last year before knowing that it was a requirement for this job and doing so legally in Colorado, are we definitely disqualified from the applicant pool?
Yes.
And could that disqualification harm us for future applications for CPW?
No. So things have not changed for us from a law enforcement perspective. Marijuana is still illegal federally. And if you've used it in the last year, you're not eligible per our policy for any of these positions. You know, if you've used it in the past and it's not in the last year, does that preclude you from working for us in this position ever? No, it doesn't. But for now, our policy is that in the last calendar year, and this is from when you would start. So basically, you know, January 1, this calendar year, if you've used marijuana, you're not going to qualify this year. And then other drugs, other illegal drugs, it's 3 years.
I had another question that I thought was a good one about our, let's find it here. As a DWM or as a ranger, there's different specialties within an area or within a park that officers take a responsibility for, like education or research or nuisance or hunting regs, etc. Is there any, in your experience, Frank, and you want to talk about, does a officer take on a specialty or is it more of a jack of all trades?
So it's going to depend, and that's going to not a very satisfying answer maybe, but you know, for a district, especially depending on what district you go to, you may end up in a district that has a lot of bear conflicts, or you may end up in a district that has a lot of fishing, or you may have been in a district that has a lot of, you know, small game bird hunting, you know, pheasants or whatever. And so where you get placed in the state, you know, whether it's, you know, at a park, you might have a big reservoir and huge campgrounds and lots of visitation, or maybe a day use only park and there's trails. And so, so a little bit is going to depend on where you get placed. And then, you know, also within that and within the responsibilities that you have at that park, you maybe end up, you know, managing a campground or being in charge of the boating section or whatever. And then there are other kinds of specialties that people get involved in, not typically their very first year on district, where they may be helping, you know, as a boat operator instructor or a driving instructor or a firearms instructor or a defensive tactics instructor, taser, field training officer. There are a lot of things like that that also happen. You know, and then again, education and interpretation is going to vary a little bit from park to park and district to district. What the needs are for the community that you're working with. But there are a lot of opportunities to kind of take the position and kind of make it yours, I guess is what I would say. Maybe you want to add something to it, Travis. You've got quite a bit of background there too.
Yeah, on the park side, you might have a little bit of specialty. You might run a boating program, or you might run campgrounds. You might have this area, but But any day and any time, you're going to be called upon to do whatever is the most pressing need on the park. And so while those areas are yours of kind of supervision, they aren't the only things that you do. And so it is a very diversified and varied job that we do in these roles.
Real quickly, I saw a question in here about, do we provide the equipment for you to use during training? Yes, you do. So, or yes, we do, excuse me. So uniform items, firearms, duty belts, handcuffs, tasers, all of that stuff is provided. You're not provided equipment.
And then I'll just, we're getting close to the end of time here. There's a couple of specific questions about what we would call accommodations and the medical accommodations for the physical fitness test and some medical related questions. We're not going to answer medical related questions publicly here because that's your private information. But if you do have what you think might be an accommodation or a physical limitation that would prevent you from completing the physical fitness exam, you should reach out to Sarah and let her know about that so she can give you more information and let you know what your options might be.
And we do provide, for folks that meet the minimum qualifications for the position, we do provide some links to be able to ask very medically specific questions for accommodations in those communications. And also kind of an overview of what that process is, so you can decide whether or not you think you might need an accommodation as part of that piece. That's all managed confidentially through the HR, by the HR team. So, it's, and they'll give you information as to what can or what will and what will not work.
Final question.
Final question. Let's do one more, and then and again, I'll just reiterate: if we didn't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to me directly or Sarah, and we'll try to answer them.
Final question for the panelists: what's been the best part of the job so far?
Hey, Jacob, you guys go first.
That's a tough one. I've learned a lot through this program, and every time I do a training, I'm like, oh, that's my favorite. Oh, that's my favorite. So it's really hard to top. I would say investigation week is probably one of my favorites. How about you?
I think my favorite was probably we did immobilization training, and just getting that close to animals and kind of being able to work on relocating and just kind of learning about their biology. And being able to be there and actually see wildlife management happening in front of you and understanding the applications of the stuff that at least I spent 4 years going to school for, and being able to tie that into something practical in the field has probably been the best part so far. Connor?
Yeah, it is a super tough question because everything I've learned so far has just been amazing and exactly what I wanted to do with my career. I'm going to go a different route and say the people I work with. Everyone I've met here is, a lot of us became instant friends because we have the same passions, the same drives, the same kind of everything. And it was amazing to just spend this time with a group of people who we agree on a lot of things. And when we disagree, we have intelligent conversations about why, because we're all interested in protecting the same resources and being out there. We're not done yet. Next week, we're all going to be out and doing ATV training. How awesome is that? And, we were up in Grand Lake and I looked around and I'm like, I'm on a boat learning boating right now. This is amazing. So it's really hard for me to pick out a single experience, but there's definitely, it is a very intensive training process, but there's moments when you're standing on top of a mountain with a chainsaw and you're like, this is my career. This is amazing. This is my passion. So you got to take every single moment in your training and just look around and breathe in the mountain air and go, wow.
Awesome. We'll leave it with that. These guys, great work this year, and they've got a little bit left to go, but they're almost to the finish line now, or getting closer, and maybe they can see it. And I'll just quickly thank everyone for taking the time to join us on this webinar, and thank all of these folks for giving up one of their evenings to answer questions for you all. And I'm just looking forward to getting to know you and hopefully see your applications coming across here pretty soon. And thanks very much for your time tonight.